Hi, everyone, for who's coming in the room. We're just going to give it a minute or so just for people to be able to filter in. We're excited to have you here, and we'll be starting shortly. Thanks, everyone. Welcome to everyone who's coming in the room. We're really excited to have you all here today for today's event. We'll be starting in just a moment, and I'll pass it along to my colleague, Najad, to do the opening just as we let people filter in, just about a minute more.
Hi, all. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your time. So here at the UNA-NCA, in case you're not familiar with us, we are really centered on connecting the global and the local. And we're dedicated to shedding light on continuing topics that are of much central matter, such as the fact that women have stories to tell, and we should make space for women's stories to truly be emphasized. And today we have we're lucky to have three amazing panelists, and my colleague Haley was able to put this amazing event together where we're truly digging into representation and how representation is really emphasized through the stories that we tell. So with that being said, I'll hand it over to Haley. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Najad, and it's wonderful to have you all in the room today. We're really excited for this event. As you all, I'm sure, noted as you registered, this is a really important event to really celebrate women who tell stories, the title of our event. This is also the 2023 theme for Women's History Month. So this is really timely in terms of recognizing women from the past and present who have been active in all different forms of storytelling in the US as well as globally. So with this Young Professionals program and a fireside chat, I'm really excited to introduce and recognize the impact of women who have been active in different forms of media and storytelling. So as Najad mentioned, we have three phenomenal panelists with us today who are going to be sharing best practices, then their insights and experiences related to storytelling and shedding light on issues and groups that are often overlooked in the US and globally. So without further ado, again, I should also say my name is Haley Pottle. I'm a current member of UNA, and I'm also a current graduate fellow with the graduate fellowship program here at the association. So really excited to be here and to be moderating this panel today. So without further ado, I will go ahead and introduce our phenomenal panelists, and then we will go into our panel session, which I will be moderating, and we'll have time for Q&A. So for you all who are attending today, feel free to drop questions in the chat as we go along for any and all of our panelists, and we'll make sure to get to those before we close today. So first, I am so excited and honored to introduce my dear friend and amazing colleague, Hiba Khatoon. She is the communications manager for conference and convenings with Women Deliver. A little bit about Hiba: she's a lifelong believer in communication for social change. She has spent the last decade managing successful communications and advocacy projects. Currently, she's managing the upcoming Women Deliver 2023 conference communication, so look out for that. Most recently, she has led the communications aspects for the Generation Equality Forum at UN Women, a major global inflection point for gender equality. Hiba strives to build dynamic and integrated communications to lead global social innovation, diversity, equity, and sustainable initiatives. Her previous roles have included managing strategic communications at UN Women and UNDP on national, regional, and global levels, working on the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, so the SDGs, such as gender equality, access to quality education, poverty, women and peace and security, and climate change. She is passionate about bridging research and practice for gender equality. In addition to teaching communications at a number of leading universities, Hiba holds an MA in Diversity and Media from the University of Westminster, and she's currently working towards her PhD in Media and Communication at Temple University. Obviously has tons of free time. It's exceptional, amazing. We're so excited to have you here, Hiba. Thank you so much for your time. Second, would just am so honored and excited to introduce Melissa Noel, who is a multimedia news journalist, contributing news and politics editor at Essence, Essence Magazine. She is an award-winning international journalist, host, and media entrepreneur. Melissa has built a distinguished career in television news and digital media with work that centers on reporting issues impacting the Black diaspora internationally and developing and managing strategic content partnerships. Melissa is the founder and CEO of the Mel and N Media Group and a news and politics editor at Essence.com. As an experienced travel reporter and Caribbean expert, she's also contributed to National Geographic Travel and TripSavvy.com. She is the creator of Destination Diaspora, a docuseries and storytelling platform that highlights the impact of the African diaspora in travel, culture, and lifestyle. Melissa is also a Pulitzer Center grantee and an Ethel Payne Reporting Fellow for Foreign Correspondence in Africa. An emerging entrepreneur, she was named one of the top 50 Caribbean American entrepreneurs 2 years in a row by the Caribbean Business Network in 2020 and 2021. A proud Guyanese American with over a decade of reporting and production experience, Melissa has made a proven impact at the intersections of media, entrepreneurship, and global impact. An incredible bio. Melissa also clearly has a super free schedule. We're so grateful to have you here and so honored that you're joining us today. Last and certainly not least, we are thrilled to have not one, but two Melissas in the Zoom room with us today. This is Melissa Tolentino, who is a communications specialist at Hitachi, and she's a former public affairs specialist with the U.S. Department of State. Melissa is a public affairs professional. She's had over a decade of experience managing communications portfolios and leading digital communications initiatives for cultural and educational programs in both public and private sectors. Currently, she leads communications for the government affairs arm of Hitachi, supporting the company's efforts to contribute to the digitalization of U.S. society and infrastructure at both the federal and state levels. Before joining Hitachi, she oversaw worldwide communications for the Fulbright program, which is the United States flagship international exchange program in the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. In this role, she primarily directed the program's digital communications efforts, including social media, online campaigns, website management, and branding. She began her career coordinating and eventually directing strategic outreach efforts for the Japan American Society of Washington, D.C., which is a nonprofit organization promoting the U.S.-Japan relationship in the cultural, educational, and business sectors in the National Capital Region. Melissa holds a master's degree in international culture and communications from Waseda University in Tokyo and a bachelor's degree in journalism and mass communications and Asian studies from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Her academic research has always focused on representations of marginalized communities in news media, television programming, and pop culture. She is also, in all of her spare time, a published author and a poet. So honored and excited to have you all here today. So huge virtual round of applause for each and every one of these extraordinary women joining us today. And without further ado, you've heard from me long enough. I'm excited to jump into our panel and start with a very broad question that I'll be sharing for, of course, all of our panelists, just to share a bit about yourselves, your work, and really what prompted you to use the media to tell stories about the issues and communities that are often overlooked. So I will start kind of where I first started with introductions as well, and pass it off to Hiba to introduce herself and share what you'd like regarding this question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Haley, and thank you all for this invitation. I'm honored to be here, and I'm honored to meet such inspiring ladies. So thank you so much. I think Haley, you said it all, but just to add the connection to our topic today. So the intersection between diversity and equity and inclusion and communication is my lifelong passion. And I started early with a personal trigger, actually, and I like to lead with personal stories because I believe that personal stories lead us somehow. So I grew up in Egypt with many traditional views of gender roles that made everything for me as growing up as a woman there harder. I had to live and fight long-rooted social norms and religion-based assumptions. Also, I'm diabetic since childhood, and back in that time, that was treated with pretty much stigma. So all of those factors made me think that there's a problem here. And even when I moved to the US a few years ago, being an immigrant, woman of color, Arab with disability made me realize how important inclusion is. And that's why along the way, I've always decided to put communication into action through the campaigns I'm working on, through my work, and even through my studies and research, to help raise awareness on the importance of inclusion and representation, which is the topic we are talking also in a way about, and how we need more proactive effort to address systematic biases in communications and storytelling. And that basically led the way throughout my work at the UN or at Women Deliver or the Generation Equality Forum, and extending the invite to you all to attend the Women Deliver conference. It's one of the largest conferences about gender equality and sexual and reproductive health and rights of women and girls. And it's taking actually place for the first time in Africa, in Kigali, Rwanda, this July. I'm happy to share more about that later, but I'll stop here and pass it on to the other inspired speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hiba, and thank you so much for sharing your kind of personal experience and what led you to your journey. I think that is such an amazing example of the storytelling that is empowering and emboldening for all of us. So thank you for sharing that. I'll pass it over to Melissa Noel.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here this evening and just to have this conversation, because for me, getting into storytelling or into reporting was something that I didn't actually see coming, but I knew that I was inspired by my family. So I am, of course, a first generation Guyanese American. So I'm from an immigrant family. And when my parents settled in the US, in New Jersey in particular, my grandmother used to send me to this local West Indian market, and I would go and pick up all her spices, all the things she wanted to cook with, but I would also pick up the newspaper. And it was a newspaper that she used to get in Guyana. And I would go home, I would go walk to the store, go home and get back home and sit down and read it with her. And to just see the way she lit up and was so excited to still feel connected to home, even thousands of miles away, that made me want to be a storyteller, because I said to myself, I was about 10 years old at that point in time. I wanted to keep people connected to the world around them, just like I saw my grandmother feel so connected just by reading. And that really stuck with me all these years. And so when I actually got into news, I was in undergrad at Howard University. I'm doing radio, I'm doing TV, I'm doing all these things. What I saw was a gap. And that gap was in the coverage, right? I knew all these great stories about Guyana. I knew all these great stories about the Caribbean region, but I wasn't seeing them on the pages of the newspapers I was reading, and I wondered why. And so throughout college, I tried my best to, travel, figure it out, take these internships, but things didn't really hit me, I don't think, until I got into a professional setting after college, and I was seeing what for me were those missing stories from the coverage, like the things that I knew that were going on that were underreported or just not reported at all. And I complained at first, but then I said, am I going to complain about it, or am I going to help be a part of the solution? So I actually, did the whole, worked in network news, went to grad school, did all of that. But there was still something missing for me. So in 2013 or 2014, I left network television and I picked up and I went to the Caribbean and I started, I became a freelancer, and people thought I was crazy, my parents included, telling immigrant parents that you're going to just go and freelance and figure it out. It didn't go over well, but I knew that I had a passion for storytelling. I knew that I knew how to connect the dots in the newsroom to get people to understand why, even though this might be happening thousands of miles away, it's still important to our audience. And I took that with me, and I started reporting from the region at first, staying with family in Guyana or friends in Trinidad, Jamaica, where have you, figuring out as I went along, and really created for myself this Caribbean correspondent role that doesn't exist in newsrooms. When we think international news, we typically think war correspondent, and you typically don't think of someone that looks like me. And so I felt like I had a story to tell, and I wanted to tell those stories. So, 8 years later, here I am, using my international reporting experience to have influence on a legacy publication like Essence magazine, which is every day, it's just like, wow, like I get to sit in these spaces and have this kind of impact. So it's just really exciting for me to have just kind of taken a chance on myself and just say, hey, I want to see these stories. I feel like I'm the person to tell them. And here's how I'm going to use my voice to go about doing that. So I try really hard I know I can't get to every single thing, but I try really hard to just kind of be a voice where I can.
Thank you, Melissa. That is exceptional. And thank you so much for sharing that perspective and that background and that just exceptional experience. Thank you. Thank you so much. I will pass it over to our other Melissa to also contribute a little bit about who she is as well.
Thanks, Haley. And thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored and grateful to be here in such amazing company. So for me, I kind of fell into communications and just studying media and digital communications, all of that sort of naturally. I've always been first and foremost a writer. That's the number one thing I consider myself. My very first memory is of writing. Before that, it was drawing, because when I didn't know words, I was drawing. Then I learned words and I started writing stories. So that's just like my whole thing. I was that kid who always got in trouble in school for having an overactive imagination, which in retrospect is kind of a weird thing to get in trouble for, but that happened back then. And just reading and telling stories has always been something that brought me comfort and joy to this day. So it was really only natural that I decided to pursue that in my day-to-day job, though I did go into the digital communications route because I am a millennial and I was on social media every day. So I honestly just decided to put those things together. And that's how I sort of fell into this role. And as we're telling stories about issues and communities that are often overlooked, this is something that really started to interest me when I started to explore more about what it was like for me as a Filipino American to grow up in the US. And also Japan. I grew up in 2 different countries. And I started to notice maybe when I was like in high school and college that the media, whether it was like news media or like TV shows or movies, they didn't talk about me or others who looked like me the same way that they were talking about, like the mainstream white communities. And I wondered why that was. And then I went to grad school in Japan, and Japanese media is very different, but there were still the same issues there. And I noticed it even more, especially when it came to non-Japanese people who weren't considered like a typical American. So that's when I was like, why is this happening? What cultural and societal norms have led to these representations in everyday media that people are consuming, on a daily basis, that these things often feel stereotyped or surface level. Like we weren't getting into deeper stories that would tell often a more accurate, story about who these people are. So I pursued that topic in grad school. I decided that I didn't want to do academia, so I got out of that. But I still brought that knowledge and awareness into all of my storytelling work, both professionally and personally.
Thank you. And thank you so much for sharing that. I'm just so aware of the full depth and scope of lived experiences that we have just with our panelists in terms of representation, and just really grateful to hold space with all of you. So thank you for sharing a bit about your stories as well personally. Would love to talk a little bit about the theme for this month with Women's History Month and kind of what is bringing us all here today. So obviously we all know the theme is the celebrating women who tell stories. So would love to hear from our panelists, really, what does this theme symbolize to you? How are you celebrating or maybe honoring those active and different forms of storytelling in the US? And again, we're seeing such a global representation here in our panels as well. So what does that look like worldwide or in the context that you all are coming from as well? So maybe just to mix it up, we'll kind of go back the other way. So maybe not to throw you on the spot, but Melissa Tolentino, if you want to kick us off with this question.
Sure. So, through everything I do, I always try to support and uplift women who have an interest in storytelling. And I think the theme of this year's Women's History Month just underscores that. Aside from my own professional work I mentioned before, and it's in my bio, I'm a poet. I'm a performing poet. And I'm just every day so grateful to women of color in the literary community who recognize that there's a need for spaces that actively include women writers, especially women writers from marginalized backgrounds. Because, and this doesn't just exist in the literary community, it's everywhere. Our experiences as storytellers, as creative storytellers, they're often very different when you're a woman, especially when you're a woman of color, from others in the field. So, I always try to support those spaces when and where I can and encourage young women storytellers in their work. Because, I was there, we were all there. And when you have somebody to help you and kind of lift you up and tell you, oh, these were my experiences, your experiences are different, but here's where I can help you, that really, it helps a lot. I didn't have a lot of that when I was just starting out in this field, and I don't discount that, but mentorship and really just extending a helping hand and telling people about where you've been, the hard work that you put in and what you wish you knew, that is extremely helpful. It goes a long way in just helping people achieve self-confidence and beating imposter syndrome, which, to be 100% candid, I have not beat myself yet. But it's a work in progress. And I think that the theme of this month really underscores that we, women storytellers need to be helping each other so that, we recognize that we have imposter syndrome and we can learn how to get rid of it, or at least overcome it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that and being so candid. And I think we can all relate to that in different ways. And just am so grateful for you sharing that insight. Melissa Noel, pass it to you.
For me, it's really underscoring the spirit of collaboration and making sure that I'm collaborating with other women, both in journalism and outside of it, both being a listening ear, being that second set of eyes that, someone may need when it comes to storytelling as I work across my industry and others, and also being a mentor. I really recognize that I'm in a space now where I couldn't have imagined 7 years ago. And that there's a lot of power in the fact that I do get to now make editorial decisions about what gets covered, how it's covered, who is covered. And so I do not take that lightly, because I understand how much of an impact it can make for someone's story. Like sometimes when people send me emails and they tell me how much of a difference, or they write, to our executive editors, or just comment under stories, and they say how much it means or has meant for their community to be covered, for their mom or their grandmother to be covered, just for their family story to be not only covered, but covered with care. Covered with nuance and specificity. I think it really changes how the time you take to do what you do. So for me, that spirit of collaboration with other women is so important. But then just taking that extra time, right? We're all busy. There's like 1,000 things happening, but I do try to go the extra mile, because I remember how many no's I got, or the fact that people thought what I was trying to do in like this Caribbean storytelling world I was trying to create didn't make any sense, and that there was not a place for it. And I had to just keep pushing back against those notions. So for me, I always try to be like that listening ear of encouragement for someone, and then also taking my time to not only give advice, but also being willing to collaborate in spaces so that other people know that it's possible, other women know that it's possible. And if you have someone not only rooting for you, but willing to work with you, I think some of the best work I've done has been through collaboration with other women storytellers. I'll use a quick example. I just got back from Trinidad and Tobago, not even a month ago, and I collaborated with a storyteller in Trinidad. who has been telling stories, both in Trinidad and Tobago and in different countries for about a decade. And we decided to collaborate and tag team, Trinidad Carnival coverage to work with local entities to make sure that we were telling the story beyond, just the Carnival Monday and Tuesday. We wanted to talk about tradition. We wanted to highlight women in the space. We wanted to look at the economic impact and how did we highlight women's voices. So we said, let's work together on this. And that collaboration resulted in a lot of great work. And so I'm always looking at, how can I do that in the different spaces that I move in? And then how can we bring it to, whether it's Essence or it's another, outlet, how can we bring it to the best place possible for that story to be amplified?
Oh, incredible. Thank you, Melissa. I will be continuing to think about that phrase covered with care from here on out. I really appreciate you sharing that really poignant phrase and just the themes of mentorship and collaboration and just the kind of intersectionality of women supporting and empowering women, how that has economic impacts and how that has impacts in terms of not only just to the personal lived experiences, but how we're able to propel ourselves further in our careers. So thank you for showcasing that. I will pass it over to Hiba as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Haley. These are great stories. Thank you so much for sharing. Well, in my work, like celebrating, things like International Women's Day or Women's History Month is more of like an everyday job as a communications, person. But then the two words actually that really, resonate with me are innovation and collaboration. And I'm stealing actually that word from Melissa. Well, with innovation is more of like finding creative ideas to elevate women's stories. And I'm gonna just jump into the example. So in 2017, I worked on a campaign that I'm really proud of at UN Women Regional Office for Arab States. And the problem or the issue we wanted to address back then was the underrepresentation of women in STEM fields. And we were really sick of so many data and getting some quotes from celebrities or spokespeople and so on. I wanted to find something more engaging. So what we thought of was, do you know where's Waldo or where's Wally? There's like, highly detailed illustration we used to find where's Wally. So we've created an illustration for 3 actual illustrations, one for a rocket factory, the other one was for a lab, and the third was a parliament. With all the illustration is like tiny small details of men working, doing stuff, and there's only one woman in those illustrations, and we challenged people to find that lone woman there. And the campaign's name was Finding Her. We challenge people to find that woman in a way to say, in an indirect way to say, finding her in STEM fields and political arenas should not be that hard. It went viral, people loved it. And then we asked, actually, we elevated some stories of women working in STEM and how they feel about like being, the minority there and so on. So the first word is innovation. The second word that again, I'm stealing from Melissa is collaboration. So something we've done this year to celebrate the month is we launched like a coalition of communications experts and focal points. This started at Women Deliver, but we are also expanding to all communications, experts all over the organizations. This is not only the US, it's globally. It's like a monthly meeting where we come together, we share what are the issues, how we can overcome them. Sometimes we do like a brown bag about something. So this kind of allyship or partnership, it's in a way we're also engaging other communications focal points who elevates women's and women and girl stories everywhere. So these are my 2 words for this month. Over to you, Haley.
Thank you. That is incredible. And I am absolutely going to look up this campaign after this call in terms of the Where's Waldo of the Women in STEM. That is a brilliant, innovative and collaborative initiative. So thank you so much for sharing that example. I am personally very passionate about women in STEM as well. So thank you for sharing that example with us. I do also just want to flag to our attendees as well. Please feel free to drop questions for our Q&A session. We've already gotten a couple really great ones, so feel free to filter those in as thoughts and questions come to you, and we'll make sure to address those in about 15 minutes when we do our Q&A session. So moving right along, we're sharing a lot about the successes and achievements and important ways to showcase and represent and highlight women in storytelling. However, we know that's not always the case, and as it was already shared with our panelists, there are a lot of challenges and often misrepresentation or just lack of representation and other challenges that can come in this field. So would love to hear from our panelists about what are, in your perspective, some of the first order priorities to prevent storytelling from being a source of gender inequality and also exacerbating other inequitable practices. So just wanting to continue to shift things around, Melissa Noel, I'll hand it off to you first to dive into this question.
Sure. Thank you so much for that. I think there's a couple of things that I would say I don't think there's any one answer, but I think it's really important that women get to tell their own stories. A lot of times, and that could look many different ways. It doesn't necessarily have to be in a news report, but just feeling comfortable enough to utilize your platform, to be believed when you say something, to feel comfortable to share that. I think creating that space is really necessary and important. And a lot of times we don't see that. Or when we do, then we're reminded why sometimes women don't share or they don't tell their stories, because for fear of whether it's not being believed or being looked down upon, or people thinking that, you know, you're bragging in other spaces, right? If it's talking about something good. So just making women feel comfortable to tell those stories, good and bad, and believing them the first time, or just creating space for that dialogue, I think is really important. And then just kind of giving space to being able to tell those stories in a way that makes sense for them, right? So when I'm looking at the kinds of stories that I'm telling, I'm always very conscious of, well, do the people I interviewed, or out of the, I don't know, 5 people I've interviewed for this story, you know, do I have a woman's perspective? Am I including, you know, her voice or our voices in these pieces? And diversity looks in many different ways, right? So that's something I always try to think about. So just making sure that I am not kind of, when I'm thinking about my expert, that I don't fall into that trope of thinking that the expert needs to be a particular look or feel or person, but just kind of trying to center those voices there. And then also being a space where other people can come to me as well. So I think that is really important so that we don't fall into those things. But again, there's no foolproof way or no right or wrong answer. But those are some of the things I try to just remain cognizant of day to day. And I can't say that I always, you always get every single thing right. But I think always just kind of holding space and also being willing to have those conversations is really important. And I think what I love about where I am in this space and time is that I am working with the women across so many different segments and, segments of their lives and from different backgrounds. So getting those perspectives, I think has been really critical to helping me grow as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I just also wanted to, elevate your note in terms of the danger and the risk that we take if there is someone who's sharing their story, or that we do provide a platform and yet they are not believed, or they are not supported, or they are not elevated appropriately, that not only risks barriers for that individual to feel empowered or emboldened to be able to share in the future, but for others as well. And so what types of environments and spaces are we creating so that people feel safe and just cared for, kind of going back to your phrase earlier, in order to share and in order for people to hold space for that solidarity. So thank you just for noting that as well. Just wanted to really showcase that. So thank you.
And I just wanted to add there, and it doesn't necessarily have to be something bad. Sometimes, women don't want to share the good things because people might say, oh, you're bragging, or you're doing X, Y, and Z. And I think it's important that you amplify those good things and be transparent about that so that people can celebrate you, but just creating space on both sides.
That's excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much for highlighting that as well. It's really important to see both sides of that coin, if you will. Thank you for sharing that. I'll pass it over to Hiba now.
Thanks, Haley. +1, +1. Priorities. So along with diversifying the voices, things that we already know, highlighting stories that challenge harmful stereotypes, and actually addressing the power imbalances in the storytelling by creating safe spaces, as you and Melissa mentioned, providing the education and support, calling people in rather than out, unpacking microaggressions at work, and that will eventually reflect on our external communications, because it all starts with internal communications as well. I also found that combining data with stories and personal experiences is great. I just hate to narrate numbers, but it's also, those numbers come from people, come from real stories. So I like to highlight that as well. Maintaining accessibility measures along the way is another way to engage people more. So for conferences and campaigns, if we are providing translations, if we are providing sign language and alt text and different types of closed captioning, and so like the branding with the colors we are using for logos and videos and audio visuals in general, this is also like a priority. There are like so many things there to make life easier for everyone, and everyone feels represented in those materials. That would be my take here.
Thank you. That accessibility piece is really vital and critical. If we're saying we're caring about representation and that we want to really be inclusive, what does that actually mean on multiple layers? Thank you for highlighting that as well. Other Melissa, Tolentino?
So I think the biggest thing for me, and I 125% agree with what my amazing co-panelists have said so far. The biggest thing for me, I think, is that people, especially those in high-level leadership positions, have to understand that storytelling is not just having someone tell their story, that's it, the end, they go home. It's a two-way street. And that's something that really I found was emphasized when I worked on the Fulbright program. It's a huge program, and there's so many people who are part of it: alumni, current participants, staff, Fulbright commissions overseas. And that means that there's hundreds of thousands of stories just from the alumni alone. The thing is that we can't expect all of those people to want to tell their story if we don't listen to them. I think listening is like part 2 of what storytelling is. And it's something I think that a lot of people, even professional people in the communications profession, don't do, unfortunately, just because, we are all super busy and sometimes work is just work. But it really, we can't have a successful storytelling campaign, or we can't be successful storytellers if we don't then take a step back and listen to what we have said, or to what people are saying about what we said. And, sometimes those people aren't always right, or they have conflicting opinions, but we still have to listen to what comes after the story is said in order to make our craft better. So I think, just emphasizing and underscoring that storytelling is not just putting words out there and then hoping that they land somewhere and things get done from there. We, in addition to telling and uplifting stories, have to also be the ones to listen and move things along further so that we can tell more and better stories and then get things done.
Thank you. That note on active listening is brilliant and so critical. Thank you for showcasing that. As we start to kind of wind down our question time, just a friendly reminder for our attendees, this is a great time to ask any questions in the Q&A as we get ready to address those shortly. So just wanted to flag that for everyone. For this question, I'll pass it back over to Hiba and then go through our panelists as well. Would love to hear a bit more in terms of just lessons and insights that you can share. This can be from personal and or professional experiences that are shedding light on the issues of the groups that are often overlooked in not only both the US context, but in different parts of the world globally as well. And just any factors you think that have led to these divides persisting, and maybe what any priorities that you have and or your organizations have to kind of combat those and try to provide gains and improvement in these areas. Thanks.
Thank you. I love that question. Well, the first thing I always start with when I, join a new organization or have a new communications project or campaign is revisiting what we have been doing in terms of language usage, the visuals we are using. Are we using gender neutral language in all communications so we avoid reinforcing gender stereotypes? Are we just like being binary, for example? Like being attentive to the language is really important. And I've made so many mistakes in the past overlooking those. And I've seen how people are affected by this. Like it could be like a very small thing, but people feel harmed or hurt from the way, for example, we refer to certain minorities or the usage of words. So I like to be really attentive to that. The other thing I always also like to say is dealing with media as advocates, not just tools for visibility. I really hate when we go to the media and say, hey, we have this, just post it on, like, just amplify or so. It's more than that. It's the questions they ask. It's their belief in what we are doing and the role as media to impact people and impact minds and change behavior. This is kind of a lesson learned. So I like to talk with the journalists or the media, tell them more, and again, they're advocates more than just like tools for visibility. I'll say collaboration as well with others. It can be a powerful tool in shedding lights on overlooked issues and groups. Working with others will actually amplify your own values and can leverage the collective strength and resources to achieve greater impact. The final thing might be just keeping the conversation going. It's essential to keep the conversation going, highlighting those overlooked issues and groups. Keeping the conversation going can help us keep raising awareness, maintain the momentum towards creating a positive change. So those would be my top lesson learned. Thanks.
Amazing lessons learned. Thank you for sharing. I will pass it over to Melissa Noel.
Thank you so much. I think I want to start out by saying that I really took the time to figure out what it is, or what were the kinds of stories that I felt like in the community that I was trying to serve. I really went out and did I surveyed my community in a sense, as much of it as I could. And I tried to figure out what were those issues or stories, good or bad, that they felt like were not getting enough attention. And then I used my experience as someone who has worked in mainstream US news for a considerable amount of time to then now say, now, how do I connect the two? How do I show the links? How do I show the commonality? And how can I show that this is important for an audience, whether someone is living next door to the people that I'm talking about, or they're living on another continent? And that was always like how I went about, things in that way. And so I think the biggest lessons I have learned is, one, like, you don't have to have the biggest platform in the world to make an impact. I was, just trying to get into the journalism world. I always thought, you had to have a big network behind your name and, do all these things. But I quickly learned that people were following good work wherever it was, and also people were following the story. And so wherever there's a good story and a story that should be told, people will find it, right? People will look for it, and no matter where, and people will come to trust your voice or others in that space. So that was a big lesson for me. And so I wasn't concerned on necessarily attaching my name to an organization. I was more so concerned about ensuring that when you thought about the work that I was trying to do and the people I was collaborating with, you associated that with good stories and also covering things that may not necessarily get that kind of attention. I think the other thing for me was on the flip side of what Hiba was saying is not being satisfied with just taking a press release and saying, okay, well, I can just write this up, quickly. We have quotes, we can do that. It's taking the time to say, hey, do you have time for a quick call? Can we chat for 15 minutes? I will tell you some of my best connections have come out of and long-lasting ones too have come out of just taking the time to have those conversations and connect with people. It's made for richer stories. It's made for follow-ups. And it's also kind of turned it from, hey, let's just do this quick write-up to, hey, we need to center this person's story or this organization's story. There's something bigger here. But if you don't take the time to do it, you may never figure that out. And then I think also that just knowing that everyone does have a story to tell, but it's just what part of that story can you help bring out of them? And so for me, I really take the time. I'm that person that'll take the time to do those chats, to meet up, to look across social media, follow people for quite a while, because what I've learned is that sometimes it's about timing as well. It may not be the time necessarily to tell that particular story, or you may need to watch things for a while or connect or just kind of follow, but the timing will always reveal itself. And, you can make that impact there. So lots of lessons, but yeah, I think those are some of the biggest that I've learned, particularly about having impact across the board, whether your platform is big or small.
Thank you. Took a little moment to unmute myself there. That is brilliant. And thank you so much for sharing that. I think something that hit me as you were speaking was that is a long-term investment in other people and their lives and their stories, and really being mindful about that timing, I think, is exceptional, because we're thinking about what are the best ways that we can support and empower in the right context and the right time. So I really appreciate you sharing that really, I think, unique insight. So thank you for that. I'll pass it over to Melissa Tolentino, and then we're going to hop over to our Q&A because we're getting some great questions here, and I want to make sure that we create time for that. So Melissa Tolentino, hand it off to you.
Thanks, Haley. So I think for me, the biggest lesson that I've learned that was kind of a wake-up call was that messaging and telling people's stories are not the same thing. And I think this was a big thing for me when I started working for government. Government messaging is very carefully curated. I mean, I'm sure you know this, Haley, but it's, it has to go through so many channels of approval, and you can't just write or say what you think is correct. It has to be usually what somebody else thinks is correct. And it's very often language that is not authentic. In rare cases it is, but most of the time it's not. And when I was at Fulbright, what I really had to learn was that Fulbright's official messaging, it came from alumni, and it was true in a way, but it didn't really resonate with people who believed in international education or wanted to apply for the program, or even some alumni themselves, because they didn't see stories. They didn't see themselves in official messaging. So what I really had to learn, and what was really successful, I think, for for the Fulbright program's communications, was just letting people be authentic in telling their own stories. We have to, as professionals sometimes, as communications professionals sometimes, take a step back, just let people say what they need to say. And when you work in a place where letting people say what they need to say is scary, you do need to let go of that, those inhibitions that you might have. And that's the biggest thing that I had to learn. And I really became a champion for that by the time I left. because it was very obvious that the more authentic somebody's story was, the more it would resonate with people and the more they wanted to learn more about international education or applying to an international education or academic exchange program. They didn't get anything out of official messaging. Those are just words. But, when you see somebody who looks like you or somebody who has had the same experiences as you, when you see them doing something that you thought, oh, I could never do that before, but you hear them talking about it in like their true, authentic way, then that sparks something different inside people. And so that was, I think, the biggest lesson that I learned.
Thank you. That is exceptional. And yes, I think about, often in a lot of the places that we're working, there's lots of bureaucracy. So also like, what are ways that we can ensure that the authenticity still resonates through? And what are ways that we can ensure that the message isn't getting filtered too much to where we're losing that voice? So I really appreciate you sharing that as well. We have a couple of really great questions, so I want to make sure we highlight as we can. So I think for both of these, open this up to any and all three of the panelists if you would like to answer. Our first question comes from an attendee talking about networking. So you all are obviously very exceptional storytelling professionals, and in your encouragement of other women, this attendee would love to hear about the art of networking and how you've made that work for you. We've heard a lot of talk about the collaboration piece, so would love to hear a little bit more about kind of what does networking look like for you in your spaces. So I will open the floor to any of our panelists. Melissa, I think you're on mute. Yeah.
So I can start there. For me, networking is literally like a mixed bag, because yes, there's like the official networking where I'm sending the emails and I'm trying to connect with someone, but I've been very, very intentional about networking outside of those spaces. So I spent a lot of time, particularly when I was first starting out, going to those, like, whether it was an event at an embassy or a consulate, or was a community day, or it was just kind of supporting something in the spaces that I wanted to be in. I have met so many of the people that I now can call on for different things in those spaces. So where someone was, I don't know, starting out in their career 9 years ago, now they're a VP somewhere, or where they were, running this nonprofit, now they're somewhere else, and we've developed relationships. So I really am really big on kind of like being in the communities. A lot of times it may surprise people. Sometimes people will think, well, how are they connected to that person? Or how can they, I used to always wonder, like, how do people really build that Rolodex? And for me, particularly with like the Caribbean community or immigrant community, it was really about showing up. People want to see your face. People want to know that you care. And so even if I wasn't covering a story or doing storytelling per se, I was showing up at the things that I knew were important to the community. So whether that was like the Little Caribbean, celebration day in Brooklyn, or that was going to the Jamaican consulate because there was a celebration for their independence, or whatever it was, like I really did a lot of that over the course of several years. And I've met literally some of the biggest collaborators that I have now, and people that I can call on, came from doing that. And then also social media. My sister she always laughs at me because she'll say, where'd you meet this person? On Instagram? And I'll laugh because I'm like, you know what? Yes, we met on Instagram like 4 years ago. And I have met some of the most engaging, powerful women just by saying like, hey, love what you're doing. Hope we can connect one day. And then that goes from that to, hey, I'm going to be in Jamaica in a month, or I'll be in Barbados, in May. Can we meet up? I really love what you're working on. And I think, if you have some time, let's chat. I am so big on that. And that has served me throughout my career. So for me, it's not just about kind of like those, kind of like the hard and fast, like, get in the networking space kind of thing, but it's really seeing those people who are doing great things, or those people who are seeing you when they reach out or I reach out to them, like I'm like, oh, maybe we could collaborate in the future. And it may not happen right away, or it may just be someone who's just kind of in your corner rooting for you. But that has really, that has really worked for me. And I continue to have those Instagram friends who then turn into collaborators, who then turn into business partners. So many examples, even the woman I mentioned earlier, who I worked with in Trinidad, we connected on Instagram like 6 years ago. So that has worked for me.
Amazing. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you so much for that insight on networking. It is phenomenal and love that example. Just to be mindful of time, I want to make sure we don't address the other question. I'm just going to move on to our other Q&A question. This is from Nana Bruce Amankwa, who's actually a former colleague and very dear friend of mine. So I'm so glad she's in the room with us today. Her question is, really speaking about how you all are influential and you are influential in your current careers, and wanting to hear about if you've seen your work have the kind of impact and societal shifts that you want to see. And if not, maybe where do you see those gaps? So welcome, brief remarks from any and all of our panelists on this question.
I can jump in really quickly, just to say that yes and no. To answer that question, I think, I'm a big idealist, and one day, I really hope that we can all see these big societal shifts that we want to see happen. But there, most of the time the answer is no, but I don't really see that happening just on a day-to-day basis. But if I look back and think of, all the things that I did at Fulbright and in my career overall, there have been very specific points where I did see, the work that I was doing in bringing people together through storytelling. I saw that happen with my own eyes. A specific example was for Fulbright, we had a very specific storytelling trip with just 11 Fulbright participants who were very into storytelling. We took them to West Virginia, to very rural West Virginia. So it was 11 Fulbright participants from all different countries meeting people in a rural West Virginia town. We see movies about that, on the Hallmark Channel and stuff, and it was kind of like that. I'm not gonna lie, and that actually made me feel like, oh, this is working. These Fulbrighters were there and they were sharing their own stories about how, no, they're not from West Virginia, but they can relate to these issues that these Americans are experiencing, and the Americans felt the same way. And it really did open doors on both sides. And I've seen that several times in my work with international exchange participants who are open to telling their authentic stories. I saw them open doors and the minds of Americans, especially, who may have not thought about these people before. So yeah, I think in some cases, I really do see it shifting, and I do see people's eyes opening because of the art of storytelling. But at the end of the day, I do wish I saw it more. But I think, we just have to keep doing what we're doing, and hopefully we'll get there.
I might jump in really quickly and say that I really appreciate the hopeful tone. I really appreciate it. And really, to answer this, and I have these debates in my PhD classes a lot, is how to measure behavioral change, how to measure the unmeasurable. And we always end with a note with our professor that it takes generations. There are tools to measure impact. It's not an instant thing, and the challenge is really how to measure how this is going on. But to me, it's like a snowball, and everything is doable, as Melissa said. I think if you have a proper plan, we've done this. I've seen this happening before, not instantly, but slowly. Putting some messages out there, reaching out to people where they are, and so on. And I will address some of the gaps that might, challenge that impact. One of them is lack of localization. So in my country, English is not a first language. It's a second or maybe third language. And if I want to address people where they are, I need to use their own language and their own tone and their own media consumption, habits. I need to use that. So localization and not acting like one plan fits all or one size fits all. This is not gonna take us anywhere. Also, lack of political will sometimes. There is laws, but they are not implemented. This is another gap or another obstacle. Harmful stereotypes. No matter what we say, sometimes there are harmful stereotypes, you know, stem from cultural, like deep-rooted cultures, or misconsumption of religious sayings and books and so on. So this is also, you know, put another obstacle on the way. But I like to be hopeful, and I like to keep trying, and maybe in like a couple of, I don't know, sometimes they say it takes 2 generations to see change. I hope that maybe my grandchildren could come up to me one day and say something that I've been working on for years, and this is just like become the norm, like gender equality and equal representation and equal pay gap and so on, or equal pay. That would be just the norm. So ending with a hopeful note from my side.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Hiba. Melissa, Noel, just want to give you a chance to share anything in addition, and then I will pass it off to my colleague Najat to close us out.
Thanks so much. And I'll just add in here quickly. I totally agree with what my amazing panelists, co-panelists have said. And I just want to add here that, yes, the impact does come, but it takes time. And so I think that it takes time to resonate. And as we continue to kind of, you know, tell those stories with care and with nuance, you know, I think the change does come, but it definitely just takes that time, and that's okay. Like that's what I've had to learn, that it's okay that it will take that time and we'll get there. And in the interim, you just kind of continue doing the work and having that collaboration.
Thank you, Melissa. And thank you so much to all of our panelists. I'm so honored and grateful to have each and every one of you here. And it has been such a hopeful, encouraging, and inspiring conversation today. So thank you for your time. And we are so grateful for the work that you're doing in these spaces. I will pass it off to my colleagues, Najat and Lenise, to close us out.
Just really quickly, I just wanted to thank you all. I think that one thing that I've learned here is that storytelling doesn't just stir up a nation, but it does stir up the story writers themselves. And that's crucial to take away, that critical thinking that you guys are doing as you guys are writing these stories. I just want to thank you all again a million times for coming and sharing your own personal journeys. So I'll pass it off to Lenise as well.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again for joining us for our event this evening. Melissa T, Melissa N, and Heba, really appreciate you sharing your insights with us today. I think some key takeaways to highlight is the importance of not only innovation, but collaboration, especially as we're talking about partnering with other women storytellers, reaching out to the people in those communities and working with them to share their own stories, and the importance of highlighting those stories with care and being mindful of the narrative that is being putting out there, but also the importance of mentorship and reaching out and working with your other communities, but also giving back to those future leaders that will come up behind you to serve as the future storytellers, to highlight what's going on in communities around the world, but particularly the importance of using an intersectional lens and the different identities that all of us bring to the work that we do. So thank you all so much. Just to let you all know, with the Young Professionals program, we are planning to have some other upcoming events. Our next one that we're planning is our first, we're relaunching, since it's been a little bit hiatus with COVID-19, our Spring 23 career dinner events, which will take place on Saturday, March 6th. So more information will go out about that. So thank you again, and we appreciate you for taking time to join us for this event. And thank you again, Melissa, and Heba, and as well to you, Haley and Najat.
Thank you all, ladies. Have a great
all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
You're clear.
Cool. Amazing. Thank you. I was like, I'm not sure. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, you all are amazing. I'm so grateful. I took so many notes and also was trying to keep track of the questions. So I'm really glad that we recorded it.
That was great conversation.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Speaking of, I'm going to stop recording.